Look great, by the way.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning, good morning, good morning, Wealth Warriors. I want to welcome you to today's show and welcome our co-host, the October man, Mr. Robert H. Randolph. Mr.
Hello,
Randolph, are
everybody.
you here? What was that, sir?
I said hello, everybody.
Oh my goodness, I am enthusiastic today. We are back in business, and I got to tell you, it feels good. We've resolved the problems, got a great technician working with us, and does that make a difference? Yes, it does. So, the topic for this morning, we're doing it again. Insurance is the cheapest investment that you can purchase. Now, before I get started, I want to share with you that Shannon Byron was not able to be with us this morning. However, she prepped Bob and I very well. We did have a wonderful conversation. And I am also in the process of obtaining my insurance license, so I better understand the industry. And I'm not saying everybody go out and do the license thing or go out and become the tax preparer, but I certainly want to know enough so that I can help you as warriors. And she has committed to being back on the show at another time. So I want you to know that first and foremost. I also want you to know that I've got a clue, and I'll tell you why this topic came up. It came up because I started looking at the cost that was associated with final expenses, a topic that a lot of us do not like to talk about. In fact, it took me 10 years for me to have the conversation with my mother and my brother about final things that are final, because we're not coming back to this system of things once we pass away. And oftentimes people don't like to talk about it. They get solemn. And I'm saying to you, we cannot afford to be solemn, because it's in that moment that crisis actually occurs. And so we need to be prepared, because if we're not, guess what? Our assets, our heritages, what we want to leave, our legacies, can actually be dramatically affected by the loss of a loved one. Hey, Bob, share with us your thoughts regarding this topic that we're about to go into today.
Well, yes, it can be horrendous if people are not prepared, and typically people aren't prepared financially. And so that can become a major problem. It happened in my family. My stepson died, and he was his widow ended up paying $9,000 for a funeral, and I think she's still paying for it. So, having some coverage for that final, uh, uh, I don't know, for that final time, uh, it's absolutely critical. So that's my position on it. Of course,
Yeah.
I personally am taking the cheap way out.
Oh, really? And the cheap way is?
$350 for a cremation.
$350 for cremation. It's interesting that you would mention that topic, because you may recall when the three of us talked about cremation and what is happening with cremation and the new laws that are associated with it. Cremation does not always end up being as inexpensive as we originally thought it was. Your thoughts, Bob?
Well, it can be. It depends on how you do it. This $9,000 funeral that I mentioned earlier
Has
was
really affected you, I can tell.
well, it was actually a cremation, and so it depends on how you do it. There happens to be something. This is not a commercial plug or anything, but in most states there happens to be something called the Cremation Society, and that's what I was referring to when I said $350, because I mean, at that point, the less money you spend, the better off. But if you go the funeral home route, it's going to be much more expensive. So I think one has to be prepared to look at some options uh, about taking care of those final remains. And so I've cautioned my wife that I'm going to come back and haunt her
Oh,
if she, if she goes and gets in debt and spends a lot of money putting me away, because that's not what I want her to do. I want her to just take the least expensive way out of the situation and move on. So that's my kind of thoughts, as sort of as rational as that sounds. Everybody's rational before they need to do before that crisis arises. But that's my take on the whole thing.
absolutely. And again, that society is called the Cremation Society. Am I right about that, Bob?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I think in the state of Massachusetts, I know most states they're in most states, and in Massachusetts, they're based in Quincy. And so, as a matter of fact, recently my ex-wife passed on, and my sons took care of all the arrangements, and I tried to talk them into contacting the cremation society and taking the least expensive route. And I was vetoed, and they went the funeral home route. So since I wasn't paying, I allowed them to go ahead and do what they thought was best. But yeah, there is. I mean, I don't see spending a lot of money on that issue.
For most people, and I appreciate exactly what you're saying, Bob, we're rational before circumstances arise.
Mm.
And that's the time when we need to be we need to lay the plan out so that when a time comes, that rational may not kick in. However, what may kick in is what is already written down. Bob brought out a point, and what I want to share with you is options. But at this juncture, when you start preparing, powerful word, you're preparing for a couple of things. You're preparing for that loved one who has passed on. You're also preparing for any bills, anything that they've left behind for the estate to take care of.
Yes.
Yeah. And contrary to popular belief, somebody's going to come after somebody about those expenses. And I'm not just talking about the expenses that are associated with putting that loved one in the ground, or however the case may be, in the ground, spread the ashes, whatever the case may be. However, if there are any bills that are left behind, they're coming after somebody about those bills. And what about protecting your assets, the things that you want to pass on? That's what we're talking about today. And in fact, insurance, the reason why I say that insurance can be one of the cheapest routes is because when that time comes, what you are in fact able to do is call upon that insurance policy to pay those debts that are outstanding, depending on what those debts are. Also, what it does is it allows a person to be rational. It allows a person to have cash that comes in so that things can be taken care of. Now, Bob, was there an argument, if you will, associated with the fact that you wanted to go the cremation route versus going the funeral home route?
Oh yes, there was. As a matter of fact, I lost.
Aha, aha.
Oh,
Was it emotion that was involved that caused the expenditures that, as you put out, were unnecessary?
I think so, and that's unfortunate. But it's really what. And in that time of crisis, I think that's the thing that takes over. I would like to underline the point you just made about covering those last bills. I think that insurance.
Go right ahead, sir, because those are important. The floor is yours.
Absolutely. I think that insurance is a very important investment, as you put it, for doing just that. And so I think that's a very wise investment, as a matter of fact. to make beforehand. And so I would really second the motion on having some sort of insurance coverage. Now, one of the things I'd like to say though is, and maybe you're going to cover this later, is
Okay.
you be careful about the insurance that you choose. Uh, I know that a lot of times, in my mother's case, and kind of in her generation, they had these insurance guys that came around that collected $1 every week or something. And then when you needed the policy or when you needed the proceeds, you ended up with $200 or something after paying into the insurance for 20 years. So I would also caution, if people are going to go the insurance route, which I think they should, that you be careful in choosing the company or the policy that you do the insurance with, because you really have to be careful about where you spend your money. Is the company reputable? Is the policy, what kind of clauses does the policy have? And is it really going to provide some coverage when you need it? And what's the amount? And et cetera, et cetera. So you really have to do some due diligence in choosing an insurance company. I don't know if you're going to talk about that later, but I think that's a key point.
It very, very definitely is a key point. And actually, I am going to cover that. But what I'm going to start off with is I love checklists. Checklists allow us, one, to move the emotion to the side, two, to not forget the things that we need in order to press forward. So first and foremost, I'm going to say the checklist begins by interviewing people. You're going to hear again, we've got Shannon Byron, who is an insurance representative. She is talking about a specific kind of insurance. So it begins with twofold. One, what type of insurance do you actually need that protects your asset? Yes, it is about the funeral, and right now we're talking about final expense. So that is a type of insurance, a final expense insurance. What does that cover? Or what are we trying to make sure is covered? Are we covering a funeral, which, as Bob has brought out, there are so many options. For the emotional side of the family, you may actually want a funeral. Where is that funeral going to take place at? Is it going to take place at the funeral home? Is it going to take place at a religious organization? And in fact, the conversation that Shannon and I and Bob had was, if in fact you must have that funeral, then a more cost-effective route is having it at your place of worship. Now, you might be able to negotiate with the funeral home because you're saying, hey, well, you know what? I'm going to have it over here because it's more cost effective. So you might want to leverage that. And in fact, one of the things that Shannon talks about is when she works with somebody, or a client, she actually goes with them because sometimes you need some emotional support there. Bob, would you agree that having another person that knows what's going on helps the process so that that you minimize the expenses?
I absolutely would. And she made an excellent point about that. And it pays great dividends if you have someone that's kind of outside the emotional circle, if you will. And they can be
If you lose, at least you have somebody there.
Yes, exactly. So I think that's an excellent idea, and that's an incredible service that she provides, is going along and being there when discussions are held about the best options for putting away the loved one. So
Yeah.
absolutely agree.
Cool. So back with that checklist, part of the checklist is what is it that you need to do and cover if there is going to in fact be a funeral. Okay, so that's one. Second is, what expenses does that person have? How closely connected are they to you? And are you expected to pay any expenses? Bob, talk to us about the possibility of having to pay expenses and how that's handled.
Well, depending on the amount, I mean, there are some expenses and there are expenses. You have that the basic things of, things like rent and closing out residences and selling houses and closing out the financial affairs of the loved one. Those are some pretty basic expenses. And
You know what, Bob? Those can be paramount, though, because you brought up a very good point, and that is the residence. That's probably one of the largest issues to have to deal with. Because we've had people that have said, well, you know what? I'm not going to say anything to the mortgage company or anything of that nature. I'm just going to go ahead and continue paying as if that person were still alive. What's the possibility that they're going to find out that the person died?
mm-hmm. Yeah, that can get pretty tricky for people. The other thing, by the way, Brett, while it just occurred to me that one of the important issues here is, and I see this a lot, particularly in our culture, the issue of wills. I was talking to a friend of mine not long ago, and whose husband passed away in September, and we were talking about the things she had to go through and the paperwork, but one of the key issues became the will, and it sort of jarred me like, oh, I got to do something about my will. You got to write this, as you said with your checklist, you got to write this stuff down. And that's critical. That's often overlooked. And I think the reason that people overlook it is that they take the assets that they have for granted. And they say things like, well, I don't have enough to be worried about, why put together a will? But I mean, just writing down your final preferences, writing down how you want to dispose of the assets that you do have, because people do underestimate their assets. They sort of like, oh well, this old $100,000 house not worth anything, and you look around and you get an appraisal and it's worth 300,000. So you have to be careful about putting together a will and making sure that your last preferences are at least written out for people to follow, because otherwise, it becomes a real zoo.
And you are so correct. In fact, I'm going to share a quick story with folks about exactly the topic that you're talking about. And we're going to cover that in an interesting way, probably in December. I'm working on having some trust attorneys speak to us so that you have the will discussion also in concert with putting properties or putting some of your assets into a trust, if in fact a trust makes sense, so that it can be passed on. So your point is well taken.
Fabulous. Yeah, that's often overlooked. As I said, particularly by our culture, it's really, really important to take a look at that.
Absolutely, and in fact, so when we're going back to the checklist, we've got specifically that we have a checklist. Second, we make a decision. How is this final process going to occur? Are we doing funeral? If we're doing funeral, there's a small checklist, and I know Bob is famous for checklists. If anybody that's been through the commitment seminars with him, he lists, when you think it's just one item, no, it's the item, and then it's everything that falls underneath that item. And then it becomes a case, are we going to do a cremation? And cremations have changed as well, because in certain states, even if you are cremated, they still expect you to put that person, the cremated person, into a casket, which is extraordinary. And so you're burning a casket, you're burning the person, and then you are putting them in some sort of a vessel. Shannon's thought process was, put me in a bag. That's another story for another time. And then it is about what debts do need to be covered. And debts can be as small as the credit cards, the this, the that, the other. It's the debts that need to be covered. And then, as Bob brought out, it's an inventory of the assets. And one of the most powerful assets is real-time property. That's your real estate. That's the building. That's the land. Because I've got to tell you something. Assets, right now, we are in the bell curve. We are in the perform stage of the bell curve. Property values have accelerated around the entire country. They have accelerated. We went into a storm in 2000. We went into a form stage in 2006. We went from there into the storm stage in 2008. A cycle is 10 years. We're only at 2015. So we are at the zenith, and we haven't hit the other side where we're coming down to the norm and a new form stage has begun. We haven't hit that yet. So that asset, that real estate, is true real estate. You know, what's also interesting is there are assets that we may have forgotten about. Bob, you've seen commercials recently where the state is telling us that there's literally billions of dollars of monies are assets that the state presently has custody of that people don't even realize that is outstanding. Bank accounts that are old, insurance policies, stocks and the like that have actually been there are just without a doubt. It's amazing. Have you seen those commercials, Bob?
Yes, I have. Actually, I actually went and looked on the list to try to find something.
Yes, you did. How successful were you? Did you find some money that was owed to you?
Yeah, no, I didn't find anything, but I thought there might be something because I've sort of like put some stocks away someplace, but I didn't find anything for sure. By the way, there's an interesting little story about that sort of those kinds of solicitations, I guess, by the state.
Share it with us. We'd like to hear it.
Apparently, they did the same thing down in New York at some point, and the police were sitting there with warrants for the people who showed up.
I remember that. That's called a sting.
Yeah, be careful when you respond to those things. Make sure you don't have any outstanding warrants. That's my caution about that. But
I remember some of those. Those are bordering on hilarious. Yes, but they do happen.
Absolutely.
Well, I'll tell you what, I actually found some money.
Oh, great.
For myself and also my mom. And we actually got it.
Great. Okay.
And I will share this with folks. And this was interesting relative to banking and your bank activity. I had a credit union account. It was out of the city. And I specifically got that account out of the city so I would have to go someplace to get the money. That was my little discipline for myself. And so I'm putting money in that account. I'm not taking it out because most of us think that what happens is the bank, in fact, they're going to use that money and they're going to garner interest. They're going to pay us 1 and they're going to get 10% interest. And next thing you know, I happened to go out to the city because I wanted to take some money out, which was such a rarity. So it had been at least 8 or 9 months. And they told me the account had been closed and the money had been sent to the state. What do you think about that, Bob?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. In fact, not only to me, but also to my mom, because we both had accounts at that credit union and they closed them out and sent the money to the state as they said that the account was inactive. And so as a result of being inactive, there you go. No money.
I'll be darned. Yeah, that's amazing. I'd never heard of that.
And I had to work diligently. I went through all the form process to get the money back from the state. Mom did the same thing. There is abandoned money out there. And that is could potentially be a part of that asset that we are either trying to pass on or we're trying to protect.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So when you're looking at that list, we're building the list. You're doing an inventory of the asset.
Yeah.
Now, here's something that's interesting. You brought out a point, Bob, and I'm going to bring that point back to us in just a moment.
Okay.
Have you gotten nuggets out of this morning? If you got a nugget, and I'll tell you what, one of the first nuggets I know I personally got was the one that Bob talked about, in which there's a cremation society, and there's one here in Massachusetts. Now, I can only imagine people thinking, Brent, you know what that's going to look like on the Facebook page? Yes, I know what it ought to look like on the Facebook page. This is important stuff. We need to be talking about this.
Yes. Yes. For sure.
Yeah, so I want you to do this right now before I go on, and I've got two things to share with you. Before I go on and share those two, here's what I want everybody to do. It is time for us to let folks know that we are listening to the broadcast. And aren't you so pleased we actually have the broadcast going appropriately? I'm not going to tell you what happened to us and why it didn't work.
Uh,
No. But the broadcast is up.
Good.
Who are you? Who are you? What is your name? Where are you hailing from? I got the party started. And what do you do? That's one. I want you to go and make sure you put that in for us. Because one of the things that we want to be able to do, this is about wealth creation. It's about protecting ourselves. While we have a heavy topic this morning, again, notice that we said it's the cheapest investment. So this is also about investments as well. So I'm very excited about this. So I want you to, first of all, let us know who you are, what you do, how can we help you grow your assets? That's one. Secondly, what kind of nuggets did we get? In fact, I want you to put it in there. One of the nuggets was exactly what Bob talked about. A second nugget is the checklist. Somebody put in their hashtag checklist, because checklists are important in this process. Hashtag insurance is the cheapest asset, because all of us, more than likely, are first generation wealth babies. We are first generation wealth babies, and this is a part of the process. Believe it or not, like I said, it took 10 years for me to have that conversation with my mom. By the time I was ready to have it, she was like, the heck with you. I've already taken care of a number of things, because I cry every time she started to talk about it. I'd such a cry. My
Wow.
brother got up and walked away. And I looked and I said, did he not hear us? And she said, yeah, it'll take him a couple of days to process what he heard, and then he'll come on back.
Wow.
And it took him about a week to process it, and he in fact did come back.
Great.
And so that was a good one. So hashtag, it's a conversation we need to talk about. That is so critical, and it is so important. In fact, I tweeted out, we have this broadcast today because it is an important topic. Now, with that being said, why is it the cheapest asset? The cheapest insurance being the cheapest investment, rather. Well, I'm going to submit this to you. One of the reasons why is because instead of costing you $9,000 to cover that funeral, in fact, Shannon was talking about one funeral right at this point, they're having the conversation. They're actually at the funeral parlor having the conversation, and she's looking at a $12,000 bill. And there were things that reduced that bill significantly. It was still a costly bill, but it was reduced. And so what we're doing is we're having these things done in advance so that we can cut that out. One important thing that we need to cover is, who is that insurance professional that we sit down and have that conversation with? And I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, this is an interview process. That person may not be the person that you need. Bob brought out back in the day, it was a whole different story. There's a lot of regulation that's gone on, but you want to talk to some folks, ask some questions so that you know that there is a relationship, because life is relationships, that there's a relationship with this person, and that this person gets it, understands it, and is knowledgeable enough to cover the things that I need to have covered. What type of riders will cover the policy that I'm purchasing. So I said to you, the insurance, the funeral may be $9,000. Well, in your lifetime or the life of the policy, you may be spending $3,000 that covers the policy. So what's happened in that policy, you've gotten the funeral paid for contingent upon the size of the policy. And most of your final expense policies are going to run anywhere from 15 to 50,000. They're going to have a coverage of 15 to 50,000. So you need to know how much you actually need. Riders on the policy cover things other than the initial policy itself. So a rider, you might have a mortgage rider that covers the mortgage. Am I right, Bob? Various types of riders that cover things that are outside of the policy. You've got to know what you need. You know what, Bob? I remember, in fact, I sat down with Shannon, and she started asking questions. And you want to know what my first inclination was?
What is that?
It's none of your business.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Well, how old are you, Brent? None of your daggone business. Well, how much money do you have in the bank? None of your business. I mean, I had a bunch of none of your business type. And she says, hold it a moment. I'm asking these questions for a reason. And in particular, what are the assets that we need to protect? Where do they need to go?
Yes.
So they get there.
Yep.
And nobody takes those away. And I'll tell you, it took a good, I must have said none of your business at least 20 times before let's hold it a moment. Let me share with you why we're doing what we're doing.
Exactly. Well, that brings up the other issue that we talked about, and that is the relationship with your insurance person. If you have a very good relationship, actually a trust type of relationship, if you can develop that, and you should develop that with your insurance person, then you can do away with some of those none of your business kinds of answers. So it's all a matter of rapport and relationship. It's very important.
Absolutely, and true that. I shared with you, I was gonna, one of the two things I was gonna share with you, one was about that interviewing individuals. Now, ask individuals that you've got wealth warriors, you've got people that you can interact with. We've got a membership here. Ask people, who is their insurance professional? And you have a number of insurance professionals. You might have the insurance professional that covers the final expense. You have the insurance professional that covers life, health, expenses. So you need to know, well, what are we covering? Today, we're covering final expenses. And I will tell you something. Sometimes you want a person that's a specialist, that's what they do, that they cover a particular area. Why? Because you want products that are going to meet the need. For example, you might have a standard life insurance policy, but does that life insurance policy have a portion that covers a specific activity, that funeral? There are specific policies that cover just that. There's a policy that we're going to be talking about this month, and it's called a living insurance. And the sad part is, what happens if you live? Brent, what does that mean? What that means is this, that if you have a catastrophic incident, you have a heart attack, you live after the heart attack, but your life changes tremendously. What are you going to do? You can't go back to work. There is a policy that actually covers that. We're going to talk about that. So there are policies, and at this point, oftentimes people say, oh, for crying out loud, they're going to insurance me and nickel and dime me to death. No, we do not want you to be nickeled and dimed to death. That's why you're taking an inventory of what your needs are. That's why you take an inventory. So behind your tax professional, behind your legal counsel, insurance falls within there, because what we're doing is protecting our assets using the minimum amount, as Bob brought out, $350. I want it done, so that the assets that we leave behind are not adversely affected, or there's minimal that has occurred with them. Bob, your thoughts on that, and then I'm going to share this interesting second story that fits into what you talked about relative to the will.
No, I think you've pretty much said it all in that regard. I don't think there's anything I could really add to that, except to underline what you've just said is extremely important.
I appreciate that. Nothing like having a co-host that works hand in hand with you. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, I like to call Bob the October man. He is our host for the month of October, and it is an honor to have him with us, Bob. I really do appreciate that, and I want to say that on air. How about that?
Oh, thanks. Thanks so much.
The story, many of you who are in Massachusetts will likely remember, or you might be familiar with the Westgate Mall. And I remember hearing this story as a result of being in a trust class, a real estate trust class. There was a single family that owned the mall, and it was with the expectation and intention that the mall would become an asset that got passed on from generation to generation. Now, I'm going to give you the short version of this. If you want to read up, it's an interesting case study. Now, to know that mall, in fact, to go down today and to see the width and girth of that mall is amazing. The father dies. The mall goes into probate because something Bob said, no will, no coverage of this property. I can't say no will, but no coverage of the asset. The asset goes into probate. I believe there were 7 children. I might be off, but I believe there were 7 children. To pay for the death taxes, yes, because we say there are 2 guarantees in life. One is death and the other is taxes. What we should have said is the third one is death and taxes.
Wow. Yes.
Now what's happened is it's gone into probate. Those children literally sold their homes to have the money, and they didn't have enough to cover. They had to sell pieces of the real estate to cover the estate taxes. They still own a portion of the mall space, the mall real estate. But in comparison to what the father's intentions were, it almost went up in smoke. They have very little of it in comparison to what's being built there. And I was there recently, and it is alive and well. It is the premier of the Brockton area. And something that could have been a true asset generation to generation went up in smoke. Why? Because the lists weren't taken care of. The coverage of the asset, doing the inventory of the asset, not taken care of. Sudden heart attacks will cause heart attack, cancer, we can come up with a litany. However, if preparation was met with the professional that could have assisted, that property would still be in the family. Now, we could have there's a bunch of sad stories we could talk about, but let's take the high road on this. The high road is the list. The high road is the conversation. The high road is about us being prepared. And the high road is, as much as possible, pulling the emotion out of the conversation so that you can go forward and you can be incredibly successful at protecting the asset. Insurance, one of the powerful things about insurance is knowing how much you need and knowing what you do need versus what you do not need. Because sometimes we can insurance up so much that we've doubled over and doubled over and doubled over. And a professional person, somebody that this is their, if you will, this is their life, this is their business, this is their profession, can help us with that. Oftentimes, the insurances that we let go of are the very insurances that we need. One other story, my my homeowner's insurance story that actually fits into that because, again, insurance, I said, cheapest that protects the asset. A woman that came in to meet with us was so enthusiastic. The house is free and clear. I'm done. I got no mortgage. Decides that she doesn't need the insurance either. Now, I'm sure people are sitting there going, what? What was she thinking? I don't know. What I do know is this. She let that insurance policy go.
Wow.
I know. I wanted to hear that. I wanted to hear the wow.
Yeah.
It's a 3-family property. Not just her and her family. There are tenants in the house. What do you think happens? The obvious. A slip and fall.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
The wonderful asset that she wanted to pass on to the next generation is gone. Because what is the first thing the attorney is going to do? Comb the registry of deeds, find out the status of the property, and we're going to attach it. It was a story that just, I'll tell you, it crushed my heart to hear that this person had worked so much of their life for that. They've got something tangible, and that asset gone up in smoke. And it happens with car accidents. It happens with it happens with car accidents. It happens with homes. Those are the most common places that people, for whatever reason, will decide that they want to risk it. Make the payment.
Yeah.
You know, in fact, I was rented a vehicle, and I said, yes, I want the renter's insurance, and she went. And she looked at me like I had spoken a different language. She said, nobody ever wants that kind of stuff. I'm in a different state. I'm not in Massachusetts. I don't know the area very well. I want to make sure I've covered my bases. No, give me the insurance. This is one time when we do not want to be cheap. It's worth the $5 or $10 a day to make sure you're covered because you don't know what's going on. Do you know the laws in that state? I didn't know. And it was very interesting set of laws, by the way. I didn't know. North and South, very different. So let's hone it back on here. What nuggets did you get out of today? I hope one of the nuggets you got out of here that we've driven the point home is protect your assets. Did you get that? Because hashtag protect your assets.
Absolutely.
I don't know what else to say other than that, because that's the most powerful. Bob and I've shared some of the stories. So as we're coming up on the quarter of the hour, let's do an inventory, if you will, of the conversation and the importance. First and foremost, I'm going to tell you, insurance is the cheapest investment that you can make because it protects your assets. And part of wealth creation is that we protect the asset because the asset can grow. In fact, Bob and I had a conversation recently about some land values, and we discovered, was that not amazing, Bob, to find out something that you bought back in the day 30 years ago for about $10,000 is now worth $300,000.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Got to protect it. It is an asset in your inventory. Other assets that we stop and we think about, those savings accounts, those checking accounts, the stock, you know, the little bit of stock. I remember buying some stock, and at the time the stock was $41 a share. That stock is now $100 a share. Asset. And guess what? It doesn't take a lot in order to make that happen, for that to be an asset. That's part of the inventory. The vehicles that we have, that's part of the inventory. There are so many that the list is humongous for what you have that you want to make sure that you cover. You know, Bob brought something up. Who's going to get whatever it is we're talking about? We're not talking about the will yet. We're just talking about who's getting those assets, so that there's no squabbling or fighting when you are gone. who's going to actually get those assets. What do you think about that, Bob?
Oh, very, very, very important. That's the sort of thing that can be so divisive in families, uh, that, the assets are just laying there, and everybody's squabbling about them, and trying to capture them. And I've seen that over and over, unfortunately, in many families, where people end up not speaking to each other. And it's really sad, because it's just a simple matter of taking a piece of paper and writing some stuff down, and having your lawyer notarize it. That's about as simple as it is, and pay the lawyer a couple of bucks to avoid all of that. Years and years of resentment, and bad feelings in families. So I couldn't underline that more. I couldn't make that any stronger than what you just have. It's absolutely incredible.
When you talk about that, it brings home the story, and I'll tell you, stories they really outline it. My grandfather passes away unexpectedly, and it's amazing how family members that you may not even know suddenly converge.
They come out of the woodwork.
And I have to tell you, in this case, they truly came out of the woodwork. And when they come out of the woodwork, they came to my grandfather's residence, and they literally stopped picking through and move my mother aside. This is aside. Move her aside, and you don't have any rights to anything. And
wow.
The place apart. My grandfather's best friend gets in contact with my mother, and he says, "Did you get the stereo?" Called a stereo. Did you get the stereo? My mother said, "What? No, I didn't." He said, "My Jeff told me to make sure you got the stereo." Well, I'll tell you what, Bob, it would have been great if he had had that conversation with my mother a week prior.
Uh-huh.
So at that point, you don't know, should I ask the question or not? Well, why was I to get the stereo? My grandfather was a person that didn't believe in putting money in the bank. I know you're following the story.
Yeah.
My grandfather puts the money in the stereo.
Oh my goodness.
The stereo gets thrown out in the garbage because it's a stereo. It's old. They don't even use that anymore. And so the one thing that the scavengers didn't take with them was the stereo.
Oh my goodness. Oh, incredible. Absolutely. Wow.
And I don't know. I mean, for all we know, somebody got it either went into the dump, or somebody saw something before then, but lost. Why? Because we didn't do the homework. And the stereo was the asset of all things. So the long and the short is, conversations are pivotal. We wanted to open up the door for the conversation.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Bob. So that you would do this, you wouldn't wait 10 years. And especially if you have parents, older parents, you want to make sure these bases get covered as much as possible long before there are incidents that occur.
Absolutely.
The list, the inventory of assets leads to what needs to be covered. You talk to individuals so that you know who to interview. And while you're sitting with them, they're asking you a lot of questions. Make sure that you've written your questions down in advance. Because again, when we're having those conversations, we're emotional. We haven't even gotten to the stage where somebody has passed, but we're emotional also. And
Mm,
when we're emotional, you make decisions that are not the right decisions to make.
exactly.
Thank you, Bob. It is the cheapest investment because it's going to give you a return. And that return, in some instances, you're able to borrow against that policy. That policy may be a policy that has a cash value to it. And unlike policies in the past, some of those policies you pay off. You may choose to pay that policy off in its entirety in 10 years or in 20 years. And so when you've paid that policy off, it's a freestanding policy. It itself becomes an asset for you. Can you imagine? The insurance policy becomes the asset,
Hmm.
part of wealth. Oh, I'm sorry, Bob. What were you going to say?
No, I was just saying you're absolutely right. A lot of people don't think about that or are not aware of the fact that the insurance policy itself can become an asset, is an asset. So, yeah, that's an extremely important point.
Now, here's my question for all of you that are watching the broadcast today. Did you get some nuggets? Did you get some value? More importantly, are you going to do something about it? Because if you got that, are you in fact going to do something about it? That's going to be, because Bob, what happens to people oftentimes? They hear this kind of broadcast, then what happens to them? What do?
Well, they sort of put it out of their. You know what? When I get around to it, that's when I get around to it. That's what happens, and they never quite get around to it. So, take action. Absolutely. This
You
is a
know,
wake-up call.
go ahead. No, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say this is the way. Use this as a wake up call and go out and take some action immediately because
Absolutely.
we never know.
Procrastination is the enemy of
Yes,
action.
exactly, exactly.
There's another one, Bob. Procrastination is something I know. Think about it, because I know that there's another statement relative to procrastination that fits into there. But procrastination, for a certainty, is the enemy of action. And I'll tell you what, if you're having a problem with procrastination, there are two individuals that I'm going to suggest you talk to. One is the co-host, Robert H. Randolph. You can look him up on Facebook, give him an instant message. I have an issue with procrastination. I need some help. He will help you to get committed to whatever it is you need to do. So,
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Absolutely.
I appreciate that, because that is true. He will. I use that word now even more, which ergo wealth commitment. Are we committed to wealth? Another one is Barrett. Oh my goodness, Barrett Matthews, who has E2E, and he talks also about procrastination and how to get ourselves out, to get unstuck. And anticipate that you're going to spend some time on this, that this isn't going to be a 1-minute conversation, a 1-hour conversation, a one conversation. This is going to be a time-driven process to get this complete. And understand that that's what the case is, so that you can, in fact, make that happen. But it's a necessary conversation. And in particular, when we're talking about this being the cheapest investment, we're talking right now about final expenses. What's associated with the departure of a loved one? When that loved one goes to sleep in death, what are we having to do? So that's a specific kind of insurance. There are other insurances, but that's an insurance that has to be discussed because it involves so many things. If in fact our mission is to leave it for our loved one. I don't know anybody that wants to leave something to Uncle Sam and Cousin Charlie. Uncle Sam, federal; Cousin Charlie, state.
Yes,
That,
absolutely. Yeah.
that's my thoughts on it. Hey, Bob, as we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with people? Anything that's coming up that you are hosting or associated with? This is your time to be shameless and plug whatever you have. The floor is yours.
No, One of the big issues for me at this point is to invite people to look at my Facebook page. Uh, Go to Robert H. Randolph on Facebook, and you'll see a list of fan pages that you can check out. And I hope that everyone will take the time to do that. And hopefully you'll find something of value and something that's a useful idea for you. So that's my shameless plug. Thank you for giving me that time to make that shameless plug. I love that.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And ladies and gentlemen, I will go ahead and do the shameless plug and say that if, in fact, you have not come together for the end of the year, this is the last quarter of the year. And so there are some things that are very important for you to take care of in order to positively go into 2016. So if you, from first and foremost, it's about your taxes. Get prepared now. You do not want to be doing this in January. By January, you want to have everything done. You want to maximize the amount of tax deductions that you are able to get. If you do not have a home-based business, then I encourage you to get a home-based business because it will positively affect your tax base. You will be able to still pull taxes down. And remember, you can go back 3 months because those are called your preparation months. So it is that time of the year. In fact, it started October 1st, where you really want to be focused in on closing out the year and not waiting until January. You are looking for a home-based business, then we should talk. You can talk to myself. You can talk to Bob. There are so many home-based businesses out there that will meet the need. And I'd love to talk to you about that. Also, as we wrap up the year, we've talked about insurance. There are certain deductions that you can make relative to your insurance on your policy, rather on your taxes. You need to talk to your tax professional about that. If you do not have a tax professional, then I'm going to say we have a number of members in the Wealth Warriors, part of the wealth commitment, that in fact can help you with that. And as a member, what do we like to say? Membership has its privileges. So be cognizant, we're at that time of the year. You are progressive. Wealthy people are ahead of the curve. And you are wealthy right now because you are committed. I want to thank you so much for being with us on the broadcast today. It has been a phenomenal topic. Remember that insurance is your cheapest investment. On behalf of Bob, Robert H. Randolph, my co-host and October man, and myself, Brent Harding, the founder of the Wealth Commitment and Wealth Warriors, also a global consultant, global entrepreneur. I want to say thank you for being with us. We are going to be back next week. And again, Shannon will join us at another time for this broadcast. And until next week, in the words of Trevor Otts, go out and be amazing. See you next week. Bye now.
Bye bye. Thank you, Brent.
You're welcome.